record button. Today in the Rock House, we have Rocky Newton, who is an absolute icon of the British hard rock and melodic rock scene. Rocky and his band Lionheart have recently reformed and brought out two of the most brilliant melodic rock records that you will see. But today, Rocky is here to talk about his journey in the world of rock. Rocky, welcome to the Rock House. How are you, mate?
Hi, good. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Mate, there was a lot of rocks in that intro there. I need to go to the thesaurus and check out different words, I think.
Yeah, nice.
Mate, you've been in this industry for quite some time now. But as a young lad, you know, what were some of the inspirations that drew you into the world of rock?
Well, my first love was the Beatles. Just grew up listening to them. And then I got into a lot of vocal harmony bands like Crosby, Stills, Nash, and with Neil Young as well. Neil Young's a big hero of mine. I just loved their harmony singing, which was kind of part of the inspiration for later on in Lionheart with me, Dennis, and Steve with the three-part harmonies that we do. And then after that, I got into Deep Purple. And all things related to them.
Black Knight era, or a little bit later?
No, Machine Head, Made in Japan and Machine Head era. So yeah, I mean I played those albums to death. And in fact, the very first gig I did at school was we played the whole of Machine Head. that was literally what we did. You know?
Mate, I don't
very
think
badly, I have to say.
I don't think you could pick a better album to start your musical career off, though, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was also a huge Glenn Hughes fan, still am, and loved Trapeze, the early Trapeze. You know, You Are the Music is in my top 10 albums.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was fortunate enough to see Glenn Hughes here at Perth, at the Perth Concert Hall, actually, where he played just the whole set worth of Purple stuff, mate. So it was a sight to behold.
Yeah. I did a gig this time last year when he was playing with the Dead Daisies in London with the band I'm with now, Grand Slam. We opened for them, and that was awesome.
Yeah, perfect. So from the early days at school, mate, where you were playing Machine Heads, what was next after that?
Well, the thing is, we formed our first band at school. I was at school with Frank Noon and John Lockton, you know, John. John was a fantastic musician. He was studying classical guitar, and Frank and I wanted to be in a band but didn't have a clue where to start. So basically, John taught Frank how to play the drums, taught me how to play the bass, and then because we were best mates, you know, and so we started. And we used to play at parties for all our school friends. And then when we left school, we just carried it on as a three-piece, which was the next band. That name was just really a joke, because we used to go every Saturday night. So there was a local teachers training college which had live bands on every Saturday. And we used to go there, and if we didn't like the band, we'd sit at the back and be going, next. So when we had our own band, we thought, well, let's call it Next. And then, you know, it was just one of those stupid joke things which stuck. But
that's a classic name, though. Classic name. So the next band, you played with those guys in 78 or 82, famously released an EP, 4x3.
Yeah.
That must have been a pretty awesome feeling, you know. You've gone from playing Machine Head in school to releasing the first EP.
Yeah, it was. We just, you know, it was in the midst of all the punk era when everybody was, you know, doing these sort of cheap homemade records, if you like, and we thought, you know what, we're going to give that a go. So we saved up some money, went into a little studio in Hull, and recorded the 4 tracks. Just did it in an afternoon. And then got it pressed up ourselves, and we literally had the EP sleeves made, cut them out, glued them together ourselves, put it all together, and it was a real cottage industry. And then we'd take it and sell it at gigs and go around the local record stores and you know, get them to take 10 copies and see if they could sell them on sale or return, all that sort of thing. And yeah, it was really cool to actually hold a disc, you know, in your hand, and then hear it on the local radio for the first time was a real buzz.
It'd almost be a strange feeling. You want the record to sell well, but then you wouldn't, because that would mean you go back to the glue factory and put the next batch of records together, right?
Well, yeah, exactly, and it's really, really weird, because on eBay I've seen them now going for like hundreds of dollars, you know, hundreds of pounds, because they're quite rare. And then about a year ago, I was clearing out my old bedroom at my mum and dad's house, and I found, stuffed away in the bottom drawer, a box, brand new box of 25 copies of them, never been played, just actually mint. And I thought, should I put these? I don't want to flood the market, you know, I don't want to bring the price down.
Yeah, wait every couple of years.
I don't know what to do.
The title was brilliant. You talk about having great names. The 4x3, which was 4 songs by three guys. So that just really goes along with the humor of the band, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We never took ourselves too serious. I mean, we were totally passionate about the music, but we never took ourselves too seriously. It was always tongue in cheek and just having fun, you know.
Yeah, awesome. Fast forward a little bit to 1980. This is when you decided to form the band Lionheart. And I just want to talk about the original band, because there's some classic names there. We're talking Jess Cox, formerly the Tigers of Pantan, on vocals, Dennis Stratton on guitar. We all know Dennis has been a part of Iron Maiden. Steve Mann, MSG, Frank Noon, who was also, you know, not only in the next band, but also Def Leppard as well for a period of time. How, of course, yourself as well on bass, how could I forget that? But how did the five of you get together to decide to, you know, form Lionheart? Yeah,
well, there's a little piece of the puzzle kind of missing there. When we got with the next band, with me, Frank Noon, and John Lockton, we got a manager who lived in Sheffield, and he owned the main nightclub in Sheffield, and we used to rehearse in the empty rooms upstairs during the day, and we'd work behind the bar in the evening and see all these bands coming through, and we got quite a name as one of the big local bands there. And there were these young kids, well, young, they were a couple of years younger than us coming up, called Def Leppard, who just used to hang out with us. And, you know, Joe was actually a little bit of a fanboy at the start. That very quickly changed, of course. But we became really good mates with them. And, you know, and we recorded our EP that we just talked about. And Joe said, well, how did you do that? And I told him the studio we used, where we got it pressed, and they literally copied everything we did to do that. And Joe is totally cool about that. He has a radio show in the UK on Planet Rock, and a couple of years ago he actually told this story and name checked us all, and totally, you know, said that they got the idea completely from the next band, and we showed them where to go, what to do, and then so that was their eponymous EP, which, you know, which got them their deal.
Which is rarer, the Def Leppard EP that was recorded following yours, or the 4x3 EP? That'd be interesting to find out.
Well, I would imagine the Def Leppard one is worth more money. Rarity, I'm not quite sure, but the thing was, literally a couple of days before they were going into the studio to record that, they fired their drummer, and so they borrowed Frank from the next. So Frank was never actually joined Def Leppard, but they borrowed him to do recording, and I think they actually asked him to join, and I was probably the one that convinced Frank that you know, the next band, but you know, these Def Leppard boys, they're going nowhere, you know, stick with us. You know, but amazingly he still talks to me. But so we were actually, I was actually there when they auditioned Rick Allen, because we would just hang out all together, we were all mates and everything, and at one point there was even a suggestion of Steve joining the next band. You know, we had to rehearse him with Steve Clark, doing the harmonies on that song "Never on a Win," which is the first track on the EP, but that didn't work out, and then, you know, Def Leppard's career went like that, and ours kind of went, yeah. But then the next band, the three of us, we ended up moving to London, and we became a band called Wildfire. It was me, Frank, and John, and we got in a singer and a keyboard player, a guy called Alan Nelson. So that then went on for a couple of years, and then John Lockton got poached, thanks to Joe Elliott again, by Wild Horses. With Wild Horses, which I'm sure you know was the band that Brian Robertson and Jimmy Bain had when they left Lizzie and Rainbow, respectively. And Clive Edwards on drums, who was later in Lionheart. And they were looking at, Neil Carter had just left Wild Horses to join UFO, and they were backstage at the Reading Festival. And Jimmy Bain asked Joe Elliott if he knew any guitarists, and he pointed at John Lockton and said, "You need to check this guy out." And so they did. So they poached John. And so then, which was great for John and whatever, but we were left without a guitar player. And it was literally about a month or two later when we would audition guitar players and trying to carry on, Wildfire as the next band had become with a new guitar player. I was at the Marquee Club in London and got introduced to Dennis Stratton, who had just left Iron Maiden, and he'd been, I think the record company suggested he and Jess Cox should get together because he'd just left the Tigers, and they were looking for a bass player and a drummer. I think they'd already found Steve, because Steve Mann had actually auditioned for the Tigers of Pantang when John Sykes got the gig, and Steve was the runner-up to John Sykes. So Jess knew Steve from that and had kept his number. So Jess got Steve in, and they needed a bass player and a drummer. And then a mutual friend introduced Frank and me to Dennis and Jess. And they asked us down to rehearse with them, to audition, basically, which we did. And then it all just fell into place. And then Lionheart was born from that. Yeah.
What an amazing story. What an amazing story. Look, there's a couple of other names that also went through Lionheart in the early days of touring. A couple of famous names there, Les Binks from Priest and Nico McBrain, also from Maiden as well. So if you look at all-star groups, mate, Lionheart would have to be one of those, right?
Yeah, we did have a bit of a revolving door policy in the early days. The thing was, we had this, Dennis, Steve and I, when we didn't really know each other when we first started playing, but then as we got to know each other, we realized we all really liked the more melodic rock side of things, and that Dennis was a little bit of a fish out of water in Maiden. You know, I mean, there's the famous story that he got fired for playing Eagles songs on the tour bus or something, which is kind of a little bit of an urban. There's some truth to it, but the story has kind of improved with age, if you like. But we realized that we liked this melodic stuff. You know, we were totally into Foreigner, Journey. That was where our musical passions lay. And Jess, lovely guy, but his voice just was not that. I mean, you know, Jess had the sort of voice that made Lemmy sound like a choir boy. You know, it didn't fit with that idea. And so we, very sadly, sort of decided, well, if we're going to make this band what we want, then Jess is the wrong guy for us. And so we parted company with him after one gig. And then we had a couple of other singers. Reuben Archer was one who came in, and that was a bit better with Reuben. But again, we wanted the guy with the high American sounding clear voice. I don't know, it's hard to describe, but I mean, if Steve Perry had walked in the room, that's what we wanted. You know? But so then our managers said, well, you know, you spent all this time, you've tried 3 different singers, and it's becoming a bit of a joke in the music press that it's a different singer every gig. You know, you sing, Rocky. Dennis, you sing. Why not just do it as a 4-piece? And we thought, oh, we never thought of that. And so we did. And so we then for about the next 6 months or so, 9 months, we toured, and Dennis and I would trade lead vocals, kind of like the Coverdale Hughes thing in Purple. You know, Dennis would do the verses, I would do the bridge, and then we would all both sing the chorus, and every song had these big 3-part harmonies on them. And so that worked well for a while, and we got offered the summer '81 tour with Def Leppard, opening for them on the High and Dry tour. And we'd had Clive Edwards on drums, but then for some reason, I don't know, he'd left to do something else. And we got Steve knew Les Binks, and so we got Les Binks in for that.
Wow.
Yeah, and then at some point after that, Nico, before he joined Maiden, so I'm not sure whether it was before Les or after, but he played and rehearsed with us. I've got some demos with Nico playing on. Well, actually, I think they're on there's a couple of them on that Raiders album.
Yeah.
I'd have to check that, but but then literally before we were about to start doing anything, Nico came into the rehearsal room one morning and said, "Sorry guys, I've got good news and bad news. Good news is I've been asked to join Maiden, but obviously that's the bad news too." So so he went, and then trying to think. Well, then we actually managed. We got a singer in, Chad Brown. We decided if we were really going to go for the American market, Dennis and I, we got really good backing vocal voices, but I was never really confident of my voice as purely lead singer, and neither was Dennis. And so we thought we need to get somebody in. So we got Chad Brown in, who had a fantastic voice. And then the four of us without a drummer. And then our manager finally got us a record deal with CBS in America, and so we used a session drummer, a guy called Bob Jenkins, who came over with us from the UK. We went over to LA to record at Sound City, the legendary Sound City studios, which was fantastic. And well, we had a blast there. I mean, there was Joe Walsh in the next door studio, and to see Dennis completely starstruck because Joe Walsh was one of his heroes. Yeah. You know, Joe Walsh was living in a Winnebago caravan in the parking lot while we were recording in the next door studio, and they used to have this sandwich truck would pull up, you know, at 11 o'clock in the morning, serving coffees and everything. And Joe would come out, his hair everywhere, wrapped in an old blanket, just shuffling up to this sandwich truck. That's Joe Walsh.
Yeah,
it was awesome.
Amazing story. Before we talk about the debut album, you would have had a great time over in there in LA, which I'm sure we'll touch on. But you've mentored Def Leppard when you're out there touring when they're high and dry. You also were working quite closely on the tour circuit with Whitesnake as well, obviously in their very early days as well. What was it like working with Dave Coverdale, again, another hero of yours?
Well, yeah, fantastic. You know, we were totally ignored. Of course, there was Ian Pace on drums, and John Lord was on keyboards, and then Neil Murray, who then later became a friend. So I mean, I just watched from the side of the stage. You know, we'd go on first, do our thing, and then I'd get changed as quickly as possible to just sit there and watch, you know, my idols playing from a few feet away, and watching Neil play bass. I learned a lot just watching him. I mean, you know, awesome player. And then, I mean, one of the best stories from that tour was we used to the Come and Get It album was just out. A song on there called Wine, Women and Song, which was like a total party song, which we used to play for fun. And we were in the same hotel as them one night down in Cornwall, and Steve, there was a grand piano in this sort of big empty room, and Steve just started playing Wine, Women and Song, the opening riff on the piano. And all of a sudden, David walks in and starts singing, and me, Dennis, and Steve joining in with the harmonies, and that was just an awesome moment to be just stood around the piano, having a few beers, singing Wine, Women and Song with David Coverdale, and you know. I went to bed that night thinking, did that just happen?
You would have been pinching yourself for a long time after, let me tell you. Let's talk about LA. You went over to LA, you recorded Hot Tonight, which was your debut album. It came out in 1984. That would have been a marvelous experience in itself as well.
It was fantastic. Yeah, we had Kevin Beamish producing, who'd just come off of REO Speedwagon. Fantastic studio. I mean, we weren't totally aware of all the history, to be honest, when we were there with, with Fleetwood Mac and all the. But great studio, and as I say, we had Joe Walsh next door at one stage, and then Glenn Hughes and Pat Thrall were there. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. But Glenn Hughes and Pat Thrall were there doing the second Hughes Thrall album.
Wow.
And Andy Johns, funny enough, was producing that. And that was the first time I met Andy, who later went on to produce the first MSG album I did. But obviously I didn't know him at that point. But he, being a Brit, and heard my accent and everything, and I said, look, I'm a real fan of Glenn Hughes, and he let me come in the control room when Glenn was putting some bass down, and so I was literally sat 2 feet away from Glenn putting his bass down, making sure I kept really quiet. I didn't want to get thrown out, you know. So that was an awesome experience. And but then, the album, we had Bob Jenkins on drums, session guy who came, and we spent a week or so in pre-production there, and it just got it down, and we were happy with it. Listening back to it now, it sounds a little bit. Some of it sounds a little bit dated, with some electronic drum things on it, and which were all the rage in the 80s. You know, that seemed like a good idea at the time. But no, overall, I'm really proud of it. It was, good.
I think the big turning point as well for you, 84 music videos were becoming big, and one of the big, probably the big moment from that album was the video shoot for Die for Love, a great rock track as well. What was it like moving into the world of music videos at that point? Because that was foreign, right? Throughout the 70s. Yeah. It was foreign. No,
absolutely. And we were well aware of the importance of it. That's why, we actually spent a lot of money on that video, and we got hold of Rick Mail. Somebody in our management office, I think, knew Nigel Planer, who was in the Young Ones with Rick, and we really wanted Rick, and he was happy that he kept us in stitches the whole day. He was so funny, but I think drank a whole bottle of whiskey. I mean, the guy, I said to him, I thought, we're supposed to be the rock and rollers here, but he kind of out-partied.
You guys have a party,
yeah. So and it was we recorded at the old Brooklands racetrack near Weybridge in Surrey, and then in an old Victorian sanatorium, all the corridor shots, and it was cheesy, but it was sort of tongue-in-cheek cheesy. And the only kind of thing which didn't quite work out for us on that, there was a big movement in America at the time with gun control and anti-guns, basically. And of course, we're running around in this video with machine guns. And MTV weren't very impressed, and that severely hampered the airplay that we got otherwise. And we're like, couldn't somebody have told us? Can we re-edit the video? Or what? Well, that's the story.
About today, Americans concerned about guns in videos. Anyway, let's move on from that point. While in LA, did you get to play some of the iconic venues over there in support of the album?
Well, no, because we were there for 3 months, but we were just recording. We didn't do a show, and after the basic backing tracks were done, the drummer went home anyway. So we were there just doing the overdubs, and then we came back via New York to play the album to the record company, and then there were all these great plans. We did the video that came out. We were supposed to be on tour with REO Speedwagon, and I think Kansas as well. We had all these tours lined up, and then one by one, well, we had such a great. The next year was planned, and it was going to be fantastic, and everything was going to happen. Then one by one, everything went wrong. It's the usual rock and roll story. There was something like REO Speedwagon had to remix their album or do something, so the tour got pushed back. Excuse me, the Kansas tour didn't work out. There was the issue with the video on MTV.
Rocky,
excuse me.
Do you want 10 seconds to drink?
Yeah, can I get a glass? Can I just get a glass of water?
Go for it.
I'll back in.
For the fans out there of Lionheart, please go onto YouTube as well and search for the Die for Love video. It's still available on YouTube. The great Rick Mail is in the video as well. Hope you're still there, Rocky. Here he is.
We're back in the room. Yeah, sorry, I just
No, all good. We were just talking about
the last week.
video.
I'm just getting over it.
Available on YouTube as well. So I was just saying, go onto YouTube, look for Die for Love. It is still a great video. So we spoke about the REO Speedwagon tour being postponed, and then Kansas.
Yeah.
What happened with Kansas?
Yeah. Do you know what? I can't remember, but there was some issue, and then obviously there was this thing with us having guns on the video, and that suppressed that. The album had done really well in Japan, and I think it had done modestly. It did okay in the UK, but didn't really do much in America. And so we were kind of, we didn't really know what was going on. We were in limbo. Are we going to do another album? Whatever. We did a few shows around the UK. And that was it. We just literally a handful of shows around the UK to promote the album. And then I kind of got a bit fed up with the whole thing and thought, well, maybe this is it. This is as good as it gets for me. And I think Steve Mann had gone off to do some other stuff. And it was, and we tried getting, and the singer left, and Chad left, and there were various kind of attempts at trying to get the band going again with different members, and it was never quite the same. And then I got a phone call from McAuley Schenker late at night. It was a bit odd, really, because I'd almost reached the point where I thought, you know what, I'm going to have to get a real job. This isn't going to happen for me, and which was a scary prospect. And literally at midnight or something, my phone went, and I was fast asleep in bed, and I crawled out of bed and I picked the phone up, and the voice goes, "Hello, is it Rocky?" "Yeah." This is McAuley Schenker," and I'm going, "F off! Come on, who is it?" Thinking it was one of my friends being funny, and then as I kind of slowly got myself awake, and I thought, "Oh my God, it really is him!" Like, you know. And then he explained he'd been given my number by another bass player friend of mine, and he was going over to Germany to do some demos, actually at his brother Rudolph's studio, that weekend, and he needed a bass player, and he got my number, and so I was like, he said, "You doing anything the weekend?" I'm like, I think I can make it. So I went the next night at his flat in London, and he went through a few songs on the guitar, and then I went over to Germany the next weekend, and we were there for a couple of weeks. We rehearsed for a week, and then went to Rudolf Schenker's house, an amazing house with a home studio in the basement, and that was awesome. Rudolf's house, he had this, where the studio was in the basement. It was like a big, almost like a home gym or workout room and everything. And he went, let's see this. And you had to stand back against the wall. He pressed a button, and the floor went up and revealed a swimming pool underneath, which we'd emptied the water out of. And the idea was you put the drums in the empty swimming pool to get a real ambient, echoey room.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty cool.
Mate, that's luxury by today's standards. So back in the 80s, that's a dream. So, mate, things were going pretty tough for you. The timing was pretty ordinary. It led to your split in '86. You get the phone call in the middle of the night from McAuley Schenker. Your luck had changed. Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, the thing was, it was just me, Michael, and a drummer whose sadly name I can't remember, which is really disappointing because he didn't end up being in the band. And the idea was that he wanted to rehearse these song ideas he'd got, record them as backing tracks. He didn't have a singer. He was literally Michael, and that was it. He didn't have a band at all. He was starting from scratch, and then he wanted to use the tapes that we did to audition singers, and rather than auditioning them in a rehearsal situation when you can't always tell, he wanted to audition them in the studio, and so you could really hear the voice, and also give them the backing track to write a melody to and some lyrics to see how it worked with a potential songwriting partnership. So
we went in and recorded all these backing tracks, and then we came back to England, and it was like, well, you know, thanks. I don't know whether there's going to be ever anything more from this, whether you'll get asked back or whatever. But and so I then went home, and he went through the process with loads of singers, and eventually got Robin McAuley in.
Yeah.
And then a couple of months later, I got a call, you know, basically saying, now, would you like to be in the band? And I was like, yeah, okay. So the drummer, he didn't. And then, so then it was me, Michael and Robin. No drummer, no second guitar player. We did a couple of demos with the drum machine. And Michael wanted a keyboard player, second guitarist. So I said, I've got just the guy. And so I put Steve Mann's name forward.
Wow.
And then, so that's when Steve came in and he joined. And then we auditioned drummers and auditioned loads of guys, and ended up with Bodo Schopf, who's a fantastic drummer. Yeah, so then that was the band complete for what became the Perfect Timing album.
I was just about to say, mate, you've stolen my line. You've gone from Bad Timing with Lionheart to 1987's release of Perfect Timing. 89 was the follow-up. Sorry, bad joke. 89 was the follow-up for the McAuley Schenker Group, Save Yourself. And like,
yep,
both albums are considered almost the upper echelon of classic rock during that time. So, mate, you must be proud of being part of those fantastic records.
Well, no, absolutely, and even more so that I'd written or co-written a few of the songs on there as well, because in those days Michael was very open to having outside writers in. You know, I wrote with Robin and some other sort of friends of mine from London. I had loads of ideas which were originally intended for Lionheart, which I brought into the band, and I was overjoyed when you know, Michael and the management were happy to do that. It's a completely different story nowadays. I mean, Michael is, you know, on record as he hates playing other people's music, and won't even listen to anything else now because he doesn't want to be influenced. But you know, and I think it's a shame in a way, because not that I'm bigging up my songwriting contributions, but I thought it was nice to have these different influences coming in. You know, to give the album different flavors and different styles.
Yeah, mate. We mentioned before we started the cameras rolling that you were pretty impressed with the research that had been undertaken, but I must admit that there's a missing gap in my timeline. And for the amount of research I did, I just can't find what you did between the McAuley Schenker Group, the 89 release of Save Yourself, to, you know, early 2000s. What were you doing?
Okay, well, at the end of McAuley Schenker, I was living in LA. And I, for a while, I joined a band with an English guitar player who I'd known from back in the UK, called Stuart Smith. His band Heaven and Earth. I don't know if you're aware of their stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. And it was before it was called Heaven and Earth. It was the same band, but it was called Midnight. We played a lot of gigs around LA, and didn't actually record anything with them. And then I joined, formed a band called Royal Blood with an Italian guitar player called Alex Mazzi, who is amazing. I mean, he's the Shredmeister extraordinaire. He's, you know, just check out some of his work if you never have. I mean, he was nominated for a Grammy for one of his instrumental albums, Attack of the Neon Shark, I think it was called, back in the 80s. And we had a band called Royal Blood there, and we did all the showcases for record companies, and we had some fantastic songs, great band, and it was just as the grunge thing was happening, and we started showcasing, and we just realized that we were like a year too late. It just wasn't going to happen, because we all of a sudden we were unfashionable, and you know, we were just wrong for the time. And I could, the winds of change were howling all around us, and I could sense it. And I just thought, this isn't going to happen. And so we persevered with it for a bit. And I also did a little bit of production for a couple of bands. There was an LA band called She-Rock, an all-girl rock band who were fantastic, who we were friendly with. I produced some demos for them at Dave Stewart's studio. In fact, Robin and McAuley and I wrote a song for them, did that. Just keeping my hand in, doing a few things. And then I realized that this actually, I think this is probably about run its course for me. I thought, and back in the UK, I was born and brought up on the family farm. We have a 700-acre cereal farm here, and my father was retiring from the business and saying, "Well, what do you want to do? Do you want to come and run the business, or are you?" And I thought long and hard about it, and slightly hesitantly made the decision to leave LA, come back to the UK, and run the family farm. And so I did that. I went from playing the bass to jumping on a tractor and a combine harvester and doing all that stuff. And I still run the farm now. It's just
right?
Outside that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I'm not touring, but I've got it running sweetly now, so that I use contractors for all the work. So I'm just on the end of a phone, and it's it's great having that security of actually having a real business, because it's so fickle in the music industry at the moment.
Yeah.
But so for the 90s I was doing that, and then a couple of years later, after doing that, I suddenly got a phone call from Steve Mann, who was playing with Andy Scott in Sweet at the time, and saying, "Look, we Jeff Brown, their bass player, who's now in Cats in Space and a good friend, he'd got married to a girl in Florida or something, but he was still living in England, and so he was literally flitting backwards and forwards between Florida and the UK. And so whenever he was out of the country, I would basically dep for him in Sweet." And so I did quite a few tours with them around the UK. We played in Germany. The first gig I did was an open air gig in Germany with like literally one very brief rehearsal. Basically, Andy sent me a cassette tape in those days of the songs, said, "Here's the songs, learn those. And by the way, you're singing the third or the fifth harmony in that song." I'm like, "Okay, and then we'll see you at the airport on Friday." Like, oh, no pressure then.
I am an unashamed fan of the Sweet. I've tormented my kids over the years with the Sweet song Little Willie. I hope you put extra guts into performing Little Willie on stage for me, mate.
It was fantastic, because say that the songs, especially when we play them a lot heavier live, I mean they're it was such a, and playing in Germany was fantastic, because they had something like 9 #1 singles each. I think there was a statistic, they had more #1 singles than the Beatles did in Germany or something. So awesome, playing these great songs, but rocking them up,
Yeah. And still going strong too. Hello to our friends.
Yeah, well, in fact, just another bit of trivia: the bass player in Sweet at the moment is Lee Small, who's the singer in Lionheart. So, so Lee's playing bass and doing backing vocals for Sweet, which is a bit of a waste of his voice. It's very incestuous, this business.
Look, it is. The more I talk to people, the more I get it. So let's just move forward. I'd love to speak about the Sweet, but we're here talking about your career. You mentioned you were big in Japan, and I don't think that there was any bigger reward, or trying to find a different word, or recognition for Lionheart than the Japanese release of Unearthed Raiders of the Lost Archives, where they dug up a lot of demos from Lionheart's early days. Was that really the impetus to start talking about reforming the band?
Well, we did talk about it. I think at one point it was suggested whether we could actually go out to Japan, because see, Dennis at that time, well, I'm not sure it was exactly at that time, but around that time, he was in Praying Mantis, who were, kind of playing pubs in the UK, but then going to Japan and playing to 2,000 people. You know, it was they had a really good thing going there. So it was through Dennis's contacts in Japan that Pony Canyon, the record company, got in touch with us and wanted to do this, because they'd actually done a similar album with Praying Mantis called Demorabilia, I think it's called, which is an interesting play on words. But and it was the same thing. It was a load of demos. I mean, half the stuff on that Lionheart thing was literally recorded in my bedroom with a drum machine. I mean, you know, some of it was recorded properly, but there's some of it is very, very basic demo stuff and was never really meant to be heard. But you know, they wanted it, so we thought, well, what the hell? You know, it's not going to do any good sitting on a shelf collecting dust, so somebody might as well listen to it.
Well, the talks did continue because in 2016 the band did reform and played the Rockingham Festival as well. What led to the decision of reforming for that festival?
Yeah, it did. I mean, after I'd finished playing with Sweet, so from about 98, 99, I didn't actually play for about 10 years. I had a son who I was bringing up as a single parent for various reasons, and running the family farm, and basically I'd retired from the music business. And then in 2011, I think it was, I got in touch with Clive Edwards again through Facebook, who I hadn't seen for, you know, probably 15 years or so. And he was still playing. He was playing in a blues band, and said, "Oh, you've got to come out and play." And I said, "Well, I'm not really sure whether I've kind of got the mojo anymore, or whether I really want to." And I said, if I did, it would have to be something in my comfort zone, because I'm too old to learn how to play slap bass or do whatever, you know. And then we kind of cooked up this idea of doing MSG UFO type things, and he was in touch with Lawrence Archer, you know, who he was in UFO with, and also with Danny Peronell, who was on the UFO No Heavy Petting album. And the four of us kind of cooked up this slightly crazy idea of going out as ex-UFO, and which we did in 2011. And we played some festivals in Europe, played around the UK. We did a live album. And then we got a lot of not too nice messages from the UFO management saying they weren't very happy. A few warning shots across the bows.
I don't know why, but anyway.
Yeah. Didn't like us using the logo with a big X in front of it and all this stuff. I mean, to be honest, we were just doing it for fun. We thought, well, why would they care? Because, you know, they'll get royalties from anything we sell or whatever. But anyway, we ended up changing the name to House of X, and we did a studio album of originals then, you know, nothing to do with UFO, or songs that I'd been writing and Lawrence had been writing, and that was fun for a while. And again, we toured Spain and did loads of shows in Europe, and then, yeah, that was still going. And then in 2016, a guy called Dave Heron, who was one of the organisers of the Rockingham Festival in Nottingham here in the UK, which was the successor to, there was a festival called the Firefest Festival, and the Rockingham is what the Firefest Festival became. And it was very much an AOR festival. And the guys there were all big fans of Lionheart, and I got this message from him through Facebook Messenger out of the blue, asking for my phone number, and he phoned up and he said, "Look, you know, would you consider putting Lionheart back together to do a one-off reunion gig?" And I said, "Geez, well, wow." You know, it came totally out of the blue. And I said, "Well, I'll have to ask the rest of the guys." And so I phoned Dennis, and he, like me, was a little bit skeptical at first, but then quickly warmed to the idea. And I phoned Steve, and he said yes. And Clive Edwards said yes. The original singer, Chad Brown, wasn't interested at all. He left the music business and just wasn't, wished us well, but wasn't interested at all. And so we thought, okay, well, we need a singer, and a few names came up, and and then we settled on Lee Small, who was an inspired choice. I mean, Lee is a fantastic singer and not a bad bass player as well, but
sorry, Lee.
yeah, pinching my job.
You continue. Sorry.
Yeah. No. So then we got Lee in, and we literally had a week of rehearsals, and went in and did this, what was supposed to be a one-off show at Rockingham, which it started off as a complete disaster because we'd hired in some keyboards, and with Lionheart we tuned down a semitone from concert pitch, because just to make it slightly easier to sing all those high harmonies. Now we're getting on a bit, and we'd hired these keyboards in, and being a festival, we got no sound check, and we went on stage and tried the keyboard, sounded great. Nobody had thought that it was tuned to concert pitch and to tune it down a half step. So we do this Wait for the Night we open with, which is the first track on the album, and it comes in, the big dramatic thing, and then settles down to a little piano piece. And of course it was it was just horrendous because it was a semitone out. But Steve, bless him, realized obviously straight away that something was wrong, was trying to transpose it on the fly, and we're all looking at each other going, what do we do now? It was a slightly embarrassing start to the great reunion, but once we figured the problem out, we got over it, and the rest of the gig was fantastic, and we got reviews, and there were journalists from Japan over there, and obviously from the UK, and they were saying, well, why don't you do another album? And so we talked about it. Thought, well, should we? Can we? What? And they thought, well, yeah, actually we can, because Steve Mann has his own studio in Hanover. He produces albums, and the way it is now with modern recording. I mean, I recorded all my stuff on my little home studio here. Steve will send me the stems of the tracks over. I'll put my bass onto it. I send him the bass track back by WeTransfer or Dropbox or whatever, and he puts it in the track, and it's all done like that. It's not like the old days where the band's all sitting in the same room playing together. It's literally, and that's how both Second Nature and Reality of Miracles were recorded. The only time we were in the room together for recording was Dennis and I went over to Hanover in Germany to Steve's studio to do the backing vocals, because for that we wanted a bit of eye contact and a little bit of singing around the same mic. So but apart from that, it was all done individually. So we realized we could do that, and we did. And then King Records in Japan were interested in releasing it, and then we had a label in over here in Germany do it, and it all kind of took off from there. And then we were offered more gigs, so we thought, well, let's carry it.
Yeah. Second Nature was out in 2017. The reviews just say, look, melodic rock at its best. Interesting in Don't Pay the Ferryman makes an appearance on there, the old Christopher classic. In 2020, The Reality of Miracles, which continued on the theme, and if there was ever a statement that Lionheart had made, it's in the first 4 or 5 track. It really sets the scene for what Lionheart really is about. Salvation, Though as a Kingdom, High Plane, Drifter, Five Tribes. Just that melodic, almost fantastical type sound in there. What was the fondest memory of the recording of The Reality of Miracles?
Wow. Well, the thing is, because we were, like I said, we were recording it individually. It's like I'm just sort of sitting here working on the tracks. It's not like there's a lot of banter going on in this, well, except for our WhatsApp group chat, which was just, takes up all the memory on my phone. But just, hearing the tracks and like hearing, I think Thine is the Kingdom for the first time with all the vocals in and mixed, and just getting goosebumps listening and thinking, Do you know what? I'm part of this, but this is good. Yeah, and just and just that real sense of pride and satisfaction, thinking, you know what, we've done a good job here. So that
Sorry.
but sadly, we've never, because then obviously COVID happened, and since Reality Miracles, we've never played any of those songs live because we haven't been able to do it.
Is there plans for the album?
Well, we've got another album about 2/3 of the way. All the songs are written. I'm waiting for the stems to put my bass parts down. It's all the material is there. The big issue we got now is availability, because Steve is so busy. I mean, he's on tour in America with McAuley Schenker at the moment.
Yeah.
He's out till November, and they're just, and he's working, doing sessions and other albums. I've been doing a few sessions, a few bits and pieces, and of course now I got asked this time last year by Lawrence Archer to join Grand Slam, which I don't know if you know anything about Grand Slam.
Do tell us about Grand Slam, because this is pretty exciting as well.
Well, yeah, Grand Slam was originally, back in the 80s, was the band that Phil Lynott formed when he left Thin Lizzy, with Lawrence and Mark Stanway at the time. And Lawrence and Phil wrote most of the songs, a lot of which later on got credited just to Phil, I have to say, which was there was some slightly slippery management moves going on in the old Thin Lizzy camp. I mean, it's fairly well documented. There's the song Dedication, which came out as a Thin Lizzy song, which Lawrence and Phil wrote, and Lawrence got completely left off the credits on that and had to go to court to get his name added. But anyway, that's a different story. But so he wrote a lot of these songs, like Military Man and Dedication and 19, which Grand Slam obviously never really got going because of Phil's issues, and then he died before they got a record deal and ever recorded anything properly.
Yeah.
And so fast forward to 3 or 4 years ago, and Lawrence was a little bit in no man's land, wondering what to do, and decided, well, you know what, I wrote these songs with Phil. They're as much mine as they are his, so I'm going to have another go at Grand Slam. And so he put together a lineup with Grand Slam, found a great new singer called Mike Dyer, fantastic drummer, Benji Reed, and there's a sort of floating keyboard player who comes in and out. We've got a couple of guys that kind of alternate depending on availability, but and they had a different bass player who then left a year or so ago, and then Lawrence asked me to join, which I happily did. And we've been playing, this summer we've been playing some fantastic festivals all over Europe. We've just wound up a UK tour. Well, we've got one more show this weekend, a little festival down in Cornwall we're doing, and then there's a couple of other ones. And then we start recording the Grand Slam second album on the 2nd of November. We're actually going into a proper studio as a band and going to play together. So that'll make a change.
Who would think of that these days?
You what, sorry?
Who would think of that these days?
Yeah, I know. Amazing. It's like, I know, let's all be in a room and actually play our instruments together.
Right, this is just so exciting. A Lionheart album in the works, a Grand Slam album in the works. Things have just turned around from a few years ago.
I know exactly. I mean, it's great. I'm loving it at the moment, and one of the things that I said before we started recording was that I would love to get out to Australia. I mean, I think both Grand Slam and Lionheart would be fantastic. For some reason, I've just never, not even with MSG, we never came to Australia. I don't know why, but so if any promoters are listening to this, get us out there. Get Grand Slam, Lionheart, both. We'll do a double package.
Perfect. All right, promoters, get working, because we all do love the rock down here in Australia, mate. Rocky, that is just an amazing insight into your career. My feeling is it's only just starting, really. with the momentum that you've got going forward. But just one final question. There's one bit of advice you can give to someone entering this industry. What would it be?
Don't know. Oh God.
That seems to be consistent advice when I ask this question.
Yeah. I think the problem is that, as it's been well documented, and everybody says, the industry has changed beyond recognition. I mean, it's virtually impossible to make any money from selling records now. So you have to do it out of a passion for the music and to enjoy what you're doing, rather than any kind of hopes of doing anything more than that. It's I'm trying to think. I mean, music, royalties and all that. I mean, the stream of that. It's crazy. I mean, one thing I didn't mention on here was, I don't know if you're aware, but back in the day when I was really friendly with the Def Leppard guys, they got me in to do backing vocals on. Well, I did the whole of the Hysteria album, and I did the song Rock of Ages off Pyromania, which is what, 40 years ago now, or something ridiculous. Well, yeah. I'm very fortunate in that I get some residual royalties off that, and that is like still far more than anything we do now. Is never going to compare with what the stuff done back then,
amazing.
Still generates now. It's just, and so for new people coming in, they've got to accept that there's no big pot of money there anymore. You're just scratching a living, doing it because you love doing it. And the first MSG, our Perfect Timing album, I don't know what it's done now, but at the time, after the first year or so, it had sold just under 500,000 copies, and that was considered a failure by the record company.
Yeah.
Well, now you sold that, you'd be #1 around the world for 12 months. I mean, it's just gone. The market has, it's changed, hasn't it? It's all streaming and whatever. And I guess there's good and bad about it, and we have to live with it. But it's a tough environment, to get back to your original question, for new people. So I would say have a plan B in place, and then go for plan A with all your heart.
Awesome advice, Rocky. It's been a beautiful insight into your career. Just absolutely amazing talking to you. So on behalf of the Rock House, mate, I wish you all of the best with Lionheart, Grand Slam. Just best of luck, and promoters, get them down to Australia.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Rocky. Take care, mate.
Okay.